growing up in Monkey River as a kid, that whole coastline was loaded with snow.
So happens that they start to diminish.
Depleting in a rapid way.
If we don't protect them now, we'll be in some serious trouble.
Off the coast of Belize at Gladden Spit, a spectacular natural event takes place. Thousands of fish from more than 24 species come together under the light of the full moon to reproduce.
And we're talking about an area of the reef where many different species come, aggregate, and all spawn en masse.
As fishery resources dwindle worldwide, this event is both part of the problem and part of a radical new solution. Why do the fish spawn here? And where do they come from? Reef fish release sperm and eggs into the water column in a dazzling spawning display. Inside this cloud of eggs and milk, fertilization occurs. Spawning in aggregations helps to increase the likelihood of successful reproduction. About 24 hours after fertilization, the eggs hatch into 1 millimeter long larval fish. Over several weeks, the larvae grow and develop in the open sea. Specific environmental cues trigger the final stage of larval development, and the larvae make their way to nearshore nursery areas such as seagrass beds, where they undergo metamorphosis into juvenile fishes. That is, if they survive. The survival rate for larval fish reaching juvenile metamorphosis is only about 1 in a million. As juveniles grow, they migrate to mangrove habitats and back reef areas, which provide food and shelter for the growing fish. After 3 to 5 years, juveniles become adults and are ready to aggregate for spawning. Thousands of adults converge on places like Gladden Spit to repeat this annual ritual. Similar to other mass spawning areas, Gladden Spit is a reef promontory adjacent to a deep drop-off.
Gladden Spit winds up to be a perfect place for a multi-species reef fish spawning aggregations, in part because of its geomorphology. It's a place on the reef adjacent to very, very deep water, adjacent to a very steep wall, where the reef bends at about 90-degree angle, and the reef drops off very steeply right at that point. And all the fish aggregate to spawn right at that elbow. In fact, they call it the elbow locally. And interestingly, other places have very similar geomorphology, and many also called the elbow for obvious reasons, and also many of these places harbor multi-species aggregations.
Currents at the spawning site carry fertilized eggs to offshore areas where the larvae are likely to survive and grow. The trouble lies when normally solitary fish come together en masse to the same place year after year for spawning.
The problem with these aggregations is that they are very predictable in space and time, and what happens is fishermen find out about it and they all come and they aggregate where the fishes are aggregating, and they catch them and they sell them or they eat them. And that's not a big problem until it becomes unsustainable, until they take too many. And the fact is that the fish are very vulnerable at that time. Obviously, the fishes that are being caught there are generally gravid, either filled with eggs or or sperm right prior to reproduction.
This widespread capture of females before they release their eggs has resulted in rapidly diminishing fishery returns around the world.
When I was a young man, I must say, we used to go to one of these spawning areas like Emily, and you can catch as much grouper as you think you can handle. And so happens that they start to diminish. We're not sure what happened, but the scientists, they say it's overfishing.
How do you do conservation? Well, you need to maybe put a park. Well, what happens to the fishermen that are there? What happens to their livelihood? How are they going to make $1?
In order to sustain both healthy fish populations and a culturally important fishery, a growing number of scientists and fishermen believe that aggregations themselves can provide the answer. Meanwhile, experienced divers and dive guides are becoming bored.
Divers who have been around the world, they've traveled quite a bit, need new and interesting things to see.
Again, the aggregations could be their answer. How? Ecotourism. Fishermen can lead tourists to spawning sites for some truly exciting diving, thus supplementing their income without destroying the resource that they depend on.
Fishers really know these areas and they know how to survive there. Sometimes they can be very rough, etc. So they wind up to be really wonderful as boat captains and guides to take people to visit these places.
And the dive guides?
They can see all kinds of spawning behaviors and courtship behaviors that would be new to them and exciting to them.
What I really like about ecotourism and guiding, it's a whole way of just sharing your knowledge and explaining things to people that they don't know. Take them around into your environment that you know very good. You know, it's great for us as local people from Belize. You know, it's a whole learning and sharing situation.
But could an influx of divers upset the fish as they spawn?
We've been doing a study here in Belize to try to evaluate the impacts of ecotourism on spawning aggregations. We are seeing some reactions of the fish to the divers. They're very, very minimal. It really doesn't seem like these divers are having any impact at all.
Another possible downside of dive ecotourism would be if divers damage the habitat during dives. Since spawning takes place primarily in deep water, but well above the reef bottom, impact to coral colonies is very low. Gladden Spit and its spawning aggregations remain one of the last places in the world where people can come and see the awesome beauty of nature.
I don't need to explain this to anybody. If you read the newspaper, if you look at the web, you see it everywhere all the time. Fisheries are crashing left, right, and center, and we are seeing a reduction in the availability of fisheries resources. We're seeing a reduction in the numbers of fish on the reef, particularly large groupers, large snappers.
Growing up in Monkey River as a kid, that whole coastline was loaded with snook. And the gill net was introduced by the Guatemalans into southern Belize. And in about 10 years' time, the snook population went so low that it never recovered up to this present moment right now.
If we can replace commercial fishing with more of a ecotourism dive industry, we may have a chance at conserving spawning aggregations and thus bringing back the healthy fountains of reproduction, the volcanoes of reproduction that support the health of the entire fishery of the entire Caribbean.
Dive ecotourism has shown, at least here in Belize, that protecting fish aggregations as they arrive to spawn can be successful both ecologically and economically. People like Eloy Cuevas are at the forefront of a new generation of environmentally conscious fishermen who understand that the importance of reef fish extends beyond having a full net each day. Their stewardship of Gladden Spit ensures that spawning aggregations will continue to grow sustainably, both as a fishery and a world-class dive destination.